class, we will see with an example the impact of inventories on profit. So assuming that we have a company and this company produces bags and we have for different periods and we have data about the production of these bags from the company. Let's start from the period 1. What is required to do is to calculate both the cost of sales and then the gross profit of each of the 4 periods, where these periods can be either the week or the month of the year, we do not care. We are in period 1 and we have that the company purchases during this period raw materials and the value of these raw materials is 2,000 euros. And at the end of the period, these raw materials are put in the stock. We are required to calculate the cost of sales. Now let's apply the formula. We have that the formula says we need to calculate the purchases of the year. What's the value of the purchases of the year? It is exactly 2,000 euros plus the inventories at the beginning of the period. What's the value of the inventories at the beginning of the period? If we look at the data that we have, the company just purchases raw material, but we do not have an initial inventory. So the inventories at the beginning of the period are zeros. Minus the inventories final, so the inventories at the end of the period. Do we have any inventories at the end of this period? Well, the answer is yes, because these raw materials are used. Actually, they are just purchased and then they are put in the stock. So basically, the amount of inventories at the end of the period is exactly the value of our raw materials. So it is 2,000 euros. So if we calculate the cost of sales, we can see that the cost of sales at the end of period 1 is 0. Now let's calculate the gross profit, so the impact of profit on this activity from the company. So we have, first of all, the revenue. What's the revenue in this period? The revenue is 0 because the company is not selling anything, minus the cost of sales. What's the cost of sales? That's 0. So if we calculate the gross profit at the end of period 1, again, it's 0. So this is exactly what happens in this period. Now, let's move to the period number 2. What happened during this period is that the company decides to purchase additional resources, and the cost of these additional resources is 500 euros. And then the company uses the raw materials that were previously in stock, and then it employs also 1,000 euros of direct labor. So basically, raw material, direct labors, and then additional resources are used during period number 2 by the company in order to realize work in progress. And this work in progress that has been realized by absorbing these resources is put in the stock at the end of period 2. Now we are required again to calculate the cost of sales and then the gross profit. Let's start with the cost of sales. Again, the purchases of the period. Which are the purchases of the period? We can see that the purchases are 1,000 euros plus the additional resources. So we have 1,500 euros of purchases of the period, plus the inventories at the beginning of the period. What's the value of the inventories at the beginning of the period? We are at the beginning of period 2 and the initial inventories equal the final inventories of period 1. So basically what we need to do is to identify these beginning inventories exactly as the value of the final inventories of period 1. So we will have that they are 2,000 euros. This amount, so these 3,500 euros, represent what is available for the company for the production in period 2. So these resources are used and are absorbed for production, and they are put in the stock as work in progress. Now, if we need to calculate the value of the final inventories, given that this work in progress is put in the stock, the value of the final inventories is exactly the overall amount of resources that are absorbed by this work in progress. So the value of the final inventories is 3,500, which is the sum of the resources that have been absorbed. So again, if we calculate the cost of sales at the end of period 2, this is equals again to 0. Now let's calculate again the gross profit. So we have the revenue of the period, and also in this period we have that the company is not selling its bag. So we have 0. Then we have the cost of sales of this period. And the cost of sales is here, so this cost of sales is 0. And then we have that the gross profit at the end of period 2 is 0 again. Now let's see what happens in period number 3. In the period 3, we have that the company decides to use these work in progress that are in stock. Moreover, the company employs 500 euros of direct labor, and both these work in progress with the direct labor are absorbed during the period for the production, and the final result is represented by finished products. So finally, the bags are realized by the company, but these bags are put in the stock at the end of period 3. And again, we do not have any selling of product. Calculation of the cost of sales. Again, the purchases. Which are the purchases in period 3? We have the 500 euros of direct labor plus the inventories at the beginning of the period. You should have understood that the inventories at the beginning of period are exactly the final inventories of the previous period. So our initial inventories will be exactly the value of our work in progress that was in the warehouse. So the value of our inventories is 3,500. And again, these 4,000 euros represent the resources that are available for the production for the company, minus, again, the inventories at the end of the period 3. What is the value of the inventories at the end of period 3? Again, we have finished products that are in the warehouse, so the value of the finished product is exactly the value of the resource that have been absorbed in order to realize this finished product, which is exactly this value. So the previous value of the work in progress plus the purchases of the period. So the value of the final inventories is 4,000 euros. If we look at the cost of sales of period 3, that's 0 again. Now let's calculate the gross profit. Revenue of the period, and revenue of the period, given that we do not have any selling activity, is 0, minus cost of sales. What's the cost of sales? Again, 0, so that if we calculate the gross profit of the company at the end of period 3, this is 0 again. Now let's move to the period 4. What happens? It happens that finally the company is able to sell during the period 4 all of the production of the bags. So the bags are sold during this period, and the revenue which is associated to this bag is 5,000 euros. We can see from the data that what happens in period 4 is just the selling activity. So we do not have any final inventories, and moreover we do not have any additional purchases of resources, and we are required again to calculate the cost of sales and then the gross profit. Let's start with the cost of sales. We have the purchases during period 4. And we can see that the company didn't purchase anything during this period. So we have that the purchases of the period 4 is 0, plus the inventories at the beginning of the period. And we know that the initial inventories are the final inventories of the previous period. So we have that the initial inventories are 4,000 euros, minus the inventories at the end of the period. And we do not have any final inventories because the company was lucky because it was able to sell everything. So the final inventories are 0, so that we have that the cost of sales for period 4 is 4,000 euros. Now let's calculate the gross profit. We need to identify, first of all, the revenue. And the revenue associated with the selling of the bags is 5,000 euros. So we have 5,000 euros of revenues minus the cost of sales. And the cost of sales is this 4,000 euros. And we can identify the gross profit at the end of period 4, which is 1,000 euro. So if we look at the data that we have, this is really important because we have that the inventories impact on the gross profit only in the moment in which we have the selling of the product. So basically, if a company purchases resources, but these resources are just used for production and the production is not sold, you can see that the impact on the income statement is 0, while inventories impact on the income statement only in the moment in which the product is sold.